there, Sandra here from Createinspain. Today I wanted to do some watercolouring. I ordered and received some Data Rowney Aquafine Smooth watercolour paper. It is a pad of 50 sheets. It's £140 or 300 gram, depending whether you're metric or not. And it's hot pressed, and this means that it is relatively smooth. There is very little texture on this. It's nice and smooth. It's unlike my normal watercolour paper, so I just wanted to try it out and see what kind of results I got. Now this, if you can see it, is in pale grey. Drew it freehand myself on my iPad, and then I put a pen in my cutter and I drew it with a pen in the cutter. I've done a little bit of video of me doing some colouring with or painting with these. Now these happen to be Chromatech watercolour brush pens. I like them. I'm sure they are much the same as any other watercolour brush pens that are on the market. The colours are really nice. I mean, I expect that's the only real difference between the brands is the colouring. So in this particular case I have tangerine, carmine red, golden yellow and orange. I wanted to do another one of these, and this time I wanted to do one with Inktense pencils. Now Inktense are a little bit like watercolor pencils, but the colour is, as you might guess, intense. And I wanted to see how this worked on my watercolor paper, because I've not tried this on this type of watercolor paper before. Now I will continue to use these water brushes. These happen to be from Lidl. They were in a set of 3, small, medium, large. And if you buy any of the watercolor brush pens, they usually come with one of these type of things in any case. So that's what I'm going to use to continue to actually do the water part of it. So I have some water in there. I'm using gentle circular motions. Don't press hard with these things. You don't need to lay down vast amounts of colour. Now if I want to go in with a darker one in certain areas, I can go over like so. For those of you who are used to colouring pencils, it's pretty similar, I imagine. Except for the fact you don't have to use your pencils to actually do the blending. The water does that part for you. So I'm just going to see what effect this is going to give me, because quite honestly I do not know. So I'm going to start by going around the outside here with some water. Now normally I wouldn't have this strength of line. I've got this strength of line so you can actually see what I'm trying to fill in. Normally I would not. So I'm just going over these darker areas first now. You must have a cloth to hand, because if you don't, you'll end up putting dark things where you don't want dark things to be. You'll end up completely obliterating any of the paler content. So just going to put that in. If I take my brush off of the surface and take it out of shot, it's because I'm wiping it, just in case you're wondering. That's interesting. Yeah, not bad. Maybe a bit too little of the paler colour in there, but yeah, because this dark one, the violet, is very, very strong. Now again, when you're doing this on watercolour paper, you don't want to put your next load of paint or ink, wherever you like to describe it, in the area right next to it, because you want that to dry. You don't want things bleeding anywhere. So I'm going to go well away from it, and I'm going to do some colour here. Now towards the centre of the flower you generally have more colour, so I'm going to go over quite a lot of this with the ink. And then put my darker one in. Yeah, that's the darker one. And I'm going to put some of this one on that side there, just where the other petal is overlapping. There's a bit of shade there, so I'll do that. So I'm going to start off in the middle, which is where my paler colour is, and work this out. It does dissolve very nicely on here, and it's not causing any problem to activate the ink at all. I actually rather like this paper. So brush. Ooh, that colour is way too dark. Okay, I'm going to remove most of that. It's just completely the wrong colour. Don't really like that colour on there at all. So if you wet it a little bit and wipe, you can remove quite a lot. Not necessarily as much as you might want to, but you can remove a fair amount. Bearing in mind that it is an ink, so it does stain the paper more than a traditional watercolour would, because it's an ink, not a paint. Okay, I can get away with that tiny bit there, but I'm not going to use that one again. And that one's going to go back in the tin, just so I don't use it. Right, okay. So I'm going to try a slightly different technique. I'm going to go for this petal here, and I'm going to wet the surface first and see what happens when I do that. There we go. My darker one can go, oh gosh, that is very, very dark. That is dissolving the ink immediately it hits the paper. So I'm going to have to probably lift some colour out of this. I won't be at all surprised. So I'm going to come in with my water. Wipe the brush off. Piece of tissue paper is not going to get much of that ink out of there. So the moral of the tale with this is do not wet the paper first. Just put your colour on first. I said I'll get away with it just about, but not an effect I really like. So where are we going to go next? I think I will do the centre here, because this is going to be fairly dark. A little bit of colour, and pull it out with the brush. There we are. Done. And tiny bit of the darker colour in here, but not too much of it. In with the water. Now, if you're having difficulty trying to blend the colours, you may find that it's your brush. This, for example, has got quite a long flexible brush with a very tight point, and sometimes it depends on your style, but sometimes you may find that it is a lot easier if you have a slightly stiffer brush to manoeuvre the pigment. It just depends on the way that you actually do things. So let's see, where can we go? We can put some of the darker one here. Follow up with the paler colour. If you have difficulty using different colours and sort of getting the result you want when you're using different colours in one flower, try sticking to the same colour first of all and just not doing any different colours. Try just getting practice at your gradients. This is a bigger brush. This is making it easier to get a good wash over the petal. Obviously not so suitable if you're going to do one of the very smaller ones. And this one here needs to be relatively dark because otherwise we won't see the contrast. So I haven't put a lot of the dark colour in, but I'm going to put more of the pinky version in there. And from the pink to the darker colour. There we are. You can always come back in and give another layer if you have to. So I think on this one here, that's still damp, so I won't go back in on that yet. If you want to put a second layer on, make sure it's dry first. Otherwise you get the right mess. So coming in with my darker colour here. And the other thing that you can do sometimes with the darker colour is just put some veining out. I'm going to put my main colour on there. And come in with my relatively large brush. Just defining the edge where the other petal overlaps. Clean the brush off. Come in with water. And basically you continue in the same vein until you have it all completed. Where you have one petal overlapped by another is where you're going to get the darker tones, and the bit which is more open is where you're going to get the lighter ones. Now if you want to come in with another layer, as I said, make sure it is dry first, and then you can add extra colour if you need to do it. But basically this paper is working really, really well. I'm very pleased with it. So I'm going to complete this one and then we can compare the two. This is the result of my Inktense colouring in. Now this one was done with the two different colour pencils. This one was done with just the one and just allowing the water to take the pigment away and to blend it out to nothing. So that's a completely different result to this, which was done with the watercolour. Let me just zoom back out again. Got a bit too close there. So both very, very nice, both slightly different, and yeah, it's just a matter of taste as to which you like. But regarding the paper, I was pleased with it no matter what. This provided some really gorgeous results with relatively little effort. And this I found, I mean, I'm not used to doing flowers with my Inktense pencils. It's not something I generally use them for, but this blended quite nicely, quite easily as long as your brush was stiff enough to actually move the pigment a little bit. If you're trying to use too small a brush, you'll probably find it doesn't dissolve it that well. And it could be that these are better if you use a standard normal brush, or at least you are dipping your water brush, like one of these, in water as well as allowing it to seep through. Now that is something I didn't want to do in this particular demonstration because I wanted to make it kind of equal between the two, if you see what I mean. For those people who are not used to watercolouring, I think that the watercolour brushes are a very nice and easy way of getting into it. You may decide at some point you outgrow them, but there again you may not. You may never outgrow them. You may decide they're perfectly adequate for your needs, and if you don't do large scale painting, then they're going to last you quite a long time, I would imagine anyway. But the paper I think is really good. I said it is nice and smooth. There is no buckling whatsoever on this paper. Admittedly, with these sorts of things, you don't tend to get the paper absolutely soaking wet. But I have managed to buckle paper before now just using these. It can be done. It's a particular skill I have. As I've mentioned, this is actually watercolour paper. But something that my son said made me think about trying it with alcohol markers. And lo and behold, it works really, really nicely with alcohol markers. They blend really well. So I'm going to show you quickly how I've done this one. I'm going to use the same colours, but doing it on the larger rows here. So I've got 3 colours of my Arteza markers here. I've got Tuscan Sun, which is the palest. I have Honey Yellow, and I have Amber Yellow. Just going to remind myself which one is the darker of these two, Honey or Amber. Okay, so that one is the Honey. I think the Amber is, the Amber is the darker one. So I'm going to use these 3 markers to do my colouring, and I just hold them in one hand because I find it easier just to swap around between them that way. So I'm going to come in with my very darkest one in here and swap over to the Honey. Oops, wrong end. Shouldn't have done that time. And just going over the edge of this, and it blends really, really well. It's surprisingly easy. I didn't think it was going to be that easy to blend. And this one, just going to come up this direction and swap over. This one I'm going to go in this direction. Sometimes I bring out the colour a little bit further, sometimes bring it around an extra side, and just vary it depending on what I feel like doing. I'm just using little circular motions with my pen. There we are. And that is how I continue doing the entire lot until everything is coloured to my satisfaction. Now I'm not going to colour the entire lot of this because it would be somewhat boring for you to watch. I'm now actually going to come in with my very palest colour to give a little bit of a highlight on that edge. Just there. Okay, so you can add a little bit of a lighter touch if you want some brightness added to it. Now you might notice with this one it has a little more shade put in. And what I've used for the shade is actually a different brand, simply because I picked it up. This is Pale Lavender, so if I show you this colour on the paper, it is a pale lavender. But used over the top of this, you can get the nice shading that I've got where these pieces are ever so slightly browned. And so for this, all I did was went over bits where I thought there was going to be a little bit of extra shading. And then when it dries down, it goes to a nice fade because it's not a dark colour in the first place. You don't have to do anything extra to it, and it just adds shape, dimension, folds. You know, if you wanted to add a fold in a petal, that is one way of doing it. So you could just add a fold line, and it just adds a little something. But that is so very, very easy to do. It is amazing. So if you do download the file, please give this a go with colouring with whatever medium you feel comfortable with, and then try it in a medium that you don't feel quite as comfortable with. But I think you'll find that if you have the right paper and use whatever you've got to hand and see what works best for you, then I think you'll get good results no matter what you're doing, because this isn't a difficult exercise to do. So I've now got the larger rose coloured, and I'm coming in with my lavender pen, and as I mentioned, just want to add a little bit here and there where you think perhaps there might be some added shadow. Take it easy on this because you can go overboard and find out you've gone over everything, but I'm pretty pleased with that result. I'm quite happy with that. And considering this is on watercolour cardstock, I am rather surprised. Now, one thing I would say about watercolour cardstock is that it's likely to absorb more of your ink than your normal marker cardstock, okay? Because it hasn't got a coating on it, it will absorb. So you're going to go through your ink quicker if you're using it on watercolour paper. But if you just want to do the odd one or two, then it's probably not going to be an issue. I'm just surprised that it worked so well on the watercolour paper. Here are the 3 cards finished. Obviously, you can add whatever sentiment you want to them. This one has been put on the same colour card as this one, only with this one I added a stripe from a coral marker around the edges before I mounted it to get the correct colour, because I didn't have a card that was the correct colour. So this was originally a lilac card anyway, so no problem there. And this one was the colour that I wanted for my golden roses. So yeah, I think it's come out really well. The 3 different methods all work on this particular paper. And yes, I'm very pleased with the result. So I like that particular paper. You may not be able to get it in the States, but if you go for a £140 hot press smooth paper, it should give you very similar results. Thanks for watching. Take care now.